Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. Dr. Eleanor Vance approached the coffee machine, aiming to make herself a double shot of scalding strong reviver. She had a night shift in the emergency service ahead of her, and she still hadn't learned to sleep in snatches, stealing half an hour between calls. What kind of rest was that? Only Olivia, a quick-witted nurse nicknamed Morocco, with whom the children's ambulance doctor had gone through the crucible of many difficult cases, could joke about sleep. Uncle Reuben visited me again. He's chopping me up even on the go. Coffee no longer went down. Energy drinks in flashy metal cans, alas, brought no salvation, and their composition was pure poison. When a child's life somewhere in the city hung by a thread, balancing over an abyss, Olivia knew how to pull herself together, and the doctor could only marvel. Iron nerves, iron character. Eleanor recalled a phrase, perhaps from a cartoon, perhaps from some melody. To herself she mentally added, and a golden heart of immense size, holding love for the whole world. After each return from a call, Olivia and their driver, Greg, would instantly fall asleep, barely touching their heads to the pillows on the sofas in the break room. Their senior brigade member, Dr. Eleanor Vance, always felt on duty, in full combat readiness. Ellie cupped the still steaming mug with both hands, blissfully inhaled the beloved aroma, and thought with pleasure, "I'll get home after my shift. No need to cook anything. A couple of cutlets and the rest of yesterday's mashed potatoes are waiting in the fridge. My husband Vic left on a business trip this morning. Freedom for culinary parrots for 3 days." The woman stretched her legs onto the coffee table, watching her assistants sweetly dozing under the measured hum of the split system. This summer was scorching, and the unit had been working for days on end, as if possessed. Where did it draw its mechanical strength? Greg snored peacefully in his sleep. Everyone at the ambulance station knew about his infatuation with Livy, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to confess his feelings. A big man, nearly 2 meters tall, who had served in hotspots under contract and after being wounded lost his shallow wife, who didn't want to see a freak with a scar across his cheek in the house. In the presence of the lively nurse, the seasoned Gregory turned into a timid lamb, bleeding when she asked questions, breaking out in red spots from an involuntary touch. Dr. Eleanor Vance smiled, remembering how her Vitya had circled around her with interest almost 20 years ago. He approached her in the park, where she was cramming Latin on a spring day, preparing for a medical institute exam. "May I sit down? Is the spot on the bench next to you free?" Pretty light-haired Ellie flashed her gray-green eyes at him and pulled her thick satchel with textbooks closer to her. "And why didn't the neighboring benches catch your eye? There are so many empty spots on them." "I need this bench," the stocky Vic grumbled, and his face turned crimson. "Then my arguments are exhausted," the girl laughed. "Shall we introduce ourselves? I see you're unlikely to take the initiative yourself." Extending a palm damp with nervousness, the guy stammered a little fearfully. "Victor, you can call me Vic." He didn't shake Ellie's hand, instead frantically wiping the moisture onto his light summer trousers. Ellie lightly touched his hand with her fingertips and said, "And I'm Eleanor, Ellie for short. Sometimes friends also call me Ellie Bean." The nickname, which had stuck to her since childhood, instantly diffused the slightly tense atmosphere. Vic smiled happily and said, "I'd like to earn the right to call you Ellie Bean too, which means becoming your friend. And let's use you informally." "Let's," the girl replied. "Why all these curtsies and ceremonies at our age?" That day, Ellie had to rush back to the dormitory to have a clear head for the tedious Latin exam the next day. She and Victor agreed that he would wait for her at the institute. If she passed the exam successfully, they would go for ice cream and pastries at the confectionery on the boulevard. A red light flashed on the ambulance station's console. The dispatcher quickly typed something on the computer screen, simultaneously making notes in the logbook. "Brigade for a call. Address Gregson. I've already sent the details. Hurry. House on the outskirts of the city, a little girl is suffocating. Parents can't understand the cause of the sudden attack. Quickly pulling on her medical uniform, Olivia was already rushing down the stairs from the second floor. Dr. Vance, I grabbed the kit, even managed to shove your file folder next to it. Let's not waste time. I have a feeling this case will be unusual. Quickly settling into the idling van, the close-knit trio led by Dr. Eleanor Vance set off. The night city was slowly cooling down from the hot daytime haze. Gregory even felt that at times the softened asphalt was melting under the wheels of the old Gazelle van. But there was no time to think about it. He drove carefully and quickly. If the road remained this deserted, they would arrive in about an hour. Dr. Eleanor Vance, sitting next to the driver, thought, I should have put Olivia and Greg next to each other. At this hour, while Gregory sped the van at maximum speed, Olivia was lost in sad thoughts in the back compartment. She had 30 years behind her, not the easiest ones. An orphan since 3rd grade. Her family was that rare case when the loving father didn't disappear one fine autumn evening chasing other women. It all started when the woman, her mother, left. She fell in love with a young fellow chef and followed him to the ends of the earth. And why not? Isn't moving to Norilsk for 5 years as production manager of a newly opened restaurant the edge of the world? After such a treacherous act by his wife, Olivia's father seemed to lose his mind. He methodically went through the entire apartment, meticulously searching for any images of his wife. He tore up the wedding photos that stood in frames on the dresser and behind the glass in the wall unit. He destroyed traces of little Livy's mother's presence in the bathroom. When he accidentally knocked a well-worn bottle of perfume, forgotten by his wife, off the shelf, it shattered with a mournful crunch on the tiled floor. And the man just stood there, trampling the shards with his feet, as if grinding the remnants of his love into the hard surface. The bathroom smelled persistently of mom for a long time afterward. Olivia was only 10 years old at the time. She couldn't understand what was wrong with her that her mother had left her with her father without even saying goodbye. The word love was unknown to her. Her parents hadn't displayed particularly romantic tendencies in front of her. They were reserved and businesslike with each other. Later, analyzing her childhood, or rather what she remembered of it, Olivia made a promise to herself. I will elevate my chosen one to the heavens with my warm affection. I will not repeat my parents' mistakes. The girl's father drowned his sorrow in a rather peculiar way. He didn't resort to the bottle, instead burying himself in work. The husband, abandoned by his wife, worked as a plumber. He was such a master that people would queue for months if they needed an expensive bathtub or toilet installed in a luxury apartment without a hitch, without scratching a single luxurious surface. No one around even suspected that the miracle plumber had set himself a grand task: to earn fabulous money, fly to his wife in Norilsk, and prove to her that he was the one true beloved man from whom one does not run away. In a beautiful tin box that had once held nut halva, the master collected banknotes of various denominations, never even allowing himself to spend a couple of rubles on beer. The bundle grew, became plump, pleasantly warming his hands with its weight. Meanwhile, the object of his dreams up north, finding herself in an unfamiliar environment with cold realities, couldn't cope. The tragedy was so mundane that neighbors who had recently arrived as the restaurant manager merely shook their heads upon learning that she decided to walk a couple of blocks home through a severe blizzard without the company car. Livy's mother got lost in the snowy captivity. Just a couple of steps away, snowflakes descended from the sky, not gently, as she was used to. They fell upon her like a dark, icy, piercing flock of large predatory birds. Her mouth and nose were plastered. She couldn't breathe. The fatal winter struck under her knees as if with a stick. Helpless, she sat in a snowdrift. She had no strength to scream or call for help. When, an hour later, her husband, starting to worry, didn't find his friend at home, he organized a search. When the woman was found, she was still alive. She passed away quietly in the hospital later. Her southern body couldn't cope with pneumonia. Thus, Livy became half an orphan. But they learned about what had happened much later. The criminal story involving Olivia's father himself could easily be the plot of a detective novel. After his wife's sudden departure, he worked like a man possessed for a year. Finally, he had saved up the sum that seemed to him a weighty argument for his wife's return home. He dressed up, straightened his posture. But there was a hitch. There were no flights to the distant region from his city. He first had to get to a larger airport by train. His fellow travelers in the compartment seemed like nice guys. They had elite French cognac in their bag. He couldn't even pronounce the name clearly. He had Ossetian pies from a nearby bakery, a couple of his favorite juicy lemons, a chocolate bar. Olivia's father had a notorious sweet tooth. They had a heartfelt dinner. He didn't even realize he was drifting off. His thoughts became sluggish. He completely relaxed. He started telling his life story to his new friends, even shedding treacherous tears. When his neighbors suggested playing a few hands of Trivial Fool, he had no idea he was so easily drawn into gambling. He had held cards in his hands no more than a dozen times in his life. Therefore, he reacted enthusiastically to the remark, "Well, you're something. You've already managed to mess us up. We should play for money with you, lucky guy. You'll leave us all penniless here in no time." Who would refuse to so easily replenish their money bag? They each threw 10 rubles into the card pot. A laughable sum just for kicks. Before the eyes of the ill-fated traveler, paper pictures with kings and queens swirled like a mystical trick. He barely had time to figure out what to throw onto the table with the fan of colorful portraits next. Olivia's father lost the first 1,000 to his cheerful companions purely out of interest, for a bit of thrill. How this sum increased 100-fold in just an hour, he couldn't even grasp. His head felt like lead, his eyes were heavy, and for some reason, he really wanted to sleep. The last thing he heard, sinking into a viscous slumber, was Lex. Then silence and darkness. For some reason, it seemed to him that he was no longer sitting in the compartment on the cozy bed made by the caring attendant, but swaying with the carriage in some narrow metal space. A sharp screech of something metallic, a cold wind, damp drops of rare rain on his face. Flight. Livy's father's body was found a couple of weeks later in the thick roadside vegetation quite by chance, between two settlements near the railway track. Even mushroom pickers and summer residents rarely appeared in these places. But a loving couple was drawn into the forest belt. They arrived by bicycle, spent time alone without prying eyes. They were already preparing to go back home to the village. A red rag in the bushes caught their attention, which turned out to be a colored sports bag. Then there was a long process of identifying the deceased and searching for relatives. That's when it was revealed that Olivia's mother was also no longer alive. Where the money intended for the couple's reunion went, how the man ended up near the railway track, no one ever found out. A person was there and vanished for no reason. Olivia, left in the care of a compassionate neighbor during her father's trip to Norilsk, was dispatched to an orphanage by the guardianship authorities. And there were new walls, a new life. She was a sociable girl. Other children in state institutions withdraw. She, on the contrary, seemed to open up to her peers and educators. In studies and all activities, lively Livy with a mop of light brown hair, caramel-colored brown eyes, and a slender figure was ahead of everyone. Her favorite subjects were biology and chemistry. Her hobby was participating in a series of theatrical productions. But even in sports competitions and hikes, you wouldn't find a better little nurse among the girls. During one of the school outings, Olivia's classmates stepped on a rusty nail. A bad spot, a bad wound. Even the gym teacher and the young educator were at a loss. It was over a kilometer to the camp with the experienced elderly doctor, Dr. Claudia Peterson. Blood spurted from the jagged opening like a fountain, scarlet, boiling. For a few seconds, Olivia, along with the others, examined the wound. Then no one could even describe how the fearless girl fashioned a tourniquet above the injured surface from some rope that appeared out of nowhere, and even shouted to the stunned crowd, "Write down the time I tied it for Dr. Peterson, and a note, quick, here." She tore her own white cotton shirt into improvised bandages in no time, with commands, "First aid kit, quick, see what disinfectants there are, since some scatterbrain forgot to put a fresh batch of sterile bandages in it before the hike." A little later, the gym teacher, recovering from the shock, was already draping his windbreaker over the girl's shoulders, leaving her in just a thin top. With the help of two students, he constructed something resembling a stretcher from tree branches. The boy could barely walk, limping and wincing in pain. Later, at the orphanage in the stationary medical office, Dr. Claudia Peterson said to Olivia after the ambulance had left, "I just heard praises from the medical experts for how professionally the first aid was rendered, but it's you who should be praised, not me, an old crow. I didn't check before the hike that the first aid kit was poorly stocked. Shame on my gray head. Where on earth did you pick up all this professional knowledge, child?" Olivia laughed and replied, "I don't know myself. Firstly, I love movies and TV shows about medics. Secondly, it's as if someone is sitting inside me whispering, 'Take this in your hands and do this like that.'" And so it happened naturally that Olivia chose her future profession not out of necessity for mandatory education somewhere after the orphanage, but out of great sincere love. The Gazelle van with the medical team strained as it climbed a small rise at the end of the street and stopped at the house at Pechetnaya Street 10. Dr. Eleanor Vance deftly grabbed the kit and walked quickly to the gate. Olivia, delayed for a couple of seconds, was already standing behind her as usual, covering her back. An old copper doorbell was visible on the wooden gate, and Ellie thought, "Some kind of antique, probably hasn't worked for a long time." But the doorbell didn't fail, announcing the empty street in the pre-dawn silence with a ringing voice. Confident footsteps sounded behind the gate, and the next moment it swung open. A silent scene. Spectators could have stood up and filled the surroundings with thunderous, prolonged applause. Standing before Dr. Eleanor Vance was her husband, Victor, who had left on a business trip that morning in person. Seeing his wife, her husband stammered, "Please come in. The girl is in the house in the far room." Ellie and Olivia rushed towards the house. Iron hammers rang in the former's head. All questions later. Now only the girl and her life matter. But what does all this mean? Why is Vitya here? What connects him to this little girl? In the vestibule, there was a persistent smell of dusty rag rugs piled up by the entrance door. A general lack of tidiness, clearly always present here, caught the eye. In the next room, the aromas of yesterday's borscht, which had already undergone several boiling tests, and a little cinnamon prevailed. The little patient lay on a small sofa. Further away, near her, a young woman of somewhat exotic appearance was pacing. Seeing the mother, Ellie was indeed a little taken aback. Dreadlocks of tangled hair the color of acid fuchsia, eyes heavily lined with black. Below, jeans with huge fashionable rips at the knees. Above, a shapeless t-shirt with a strange pattern. Again, the thought fluttered helplessly in her head. Vic? What is her Vic doing here? A lover of impeccable cleanliness and classic style in clothing. By definition, he cannot be here. But he was standing nearby, looking at her with the pathetic eyes of a sick dog. Olivia sensed the absurdity of the situation and commanded in a loud voice, "Everyone stand back. Let the doctor examine the girl. And you, mother, quickly tell us what happened and how." The little girl lying on the pillow looked so much like Vic that Ellie's heart almost stopped. It definitely skipped a couple of beats. It became clear that the larynx was affected by angioedema. The girl was barely breathing. There were traces of hives on her face. The little one involuntarily reached her hand towards the nasty spots, trying to scratch them. Surprisingly, Vitya took it upon himself to answer the medic's questions, at which she, Dr. Eleanor Vance, felt as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over her, and he plunged in headfirst as it were. "My daughter and I were at the circus today. There's a touring show with small performers, ponies. Our girl is crazy about horses. In the second act, when the pony show just started, Elena began to cough, and then her face started swelling before my eyes. I immediately realized something was wrong. We went to the first aid station at the circus, where they gave my daughter some antihistamine. The swelling disappeared instantly. We went home. At home, everything was normal at first, and then Lainey started wheezing. I found sawdust from the circus arena in her hands. It turned out that when one of the ponies was giving her a ride in a circle during the intermission, she picked up a handful of chopped small wooden blocks from the floor. She kept smelling them to remember how beautiful her pony was. I assume it's a severe allergy." Ellie listened to his monologue and couldn't believe her ears. "My daughter and I went home. How could Vic say all these words?" For a moment, rainbow circles swam before her eyes, and she met Olivia's gaze. And Olivia understood. The doctor was unwell. Their Dr. Eleanor Vance was about to faint right in the middle of this small, stuffy room. Of course, Olivia knew her boss's husband. Undoubtedly, she realized that her supervising doctor knew nothing about her husband having a child outside of their marriage. With a decisive movement, the nurse seated Dr. Eleanor Vance on a chair, waved a cotton ball soaked in ammonia under her nose, and said only a few words. "Suspected quincus edema. We'll get her to the hospital." The doctor nodded resignedly. "The condition is serious. Hope she doesn't have a bronchospasm. Olivia, prepare adrenaline and prednisolone. They will buy us time." After the injection, Elena's face began to regain its normal color. Olivia commented, "Sir, don't stand there like a statue. Go outside and tell our driver to give you a stretcher. We need to transport the girl to the hospital. We must try to avoid intubation. I wouldn't want to put a tube into such a little one's trachea." Dr. Eleanor Vance acted like a robot automatically. She only came to when they were in the van with Vic, sitting on either side of the girl. Elena's breathing was still intermittent but had noticeably evened out. Victor didn't take his anxious eyes, full of anguish, off the child. But Ellie remembered something else. After that first date, when she had successfully passed her Latin exam, their relationship developed rapidly. Within a week, they couldn't live a day without each other. They were unconditionally liked by both sets of parents. After her 4th year, they got married and moved into Vic's grandmother's apartment. The lively old lady rushed off to her younger sister in the village, where she enthusiastically took up flower cultivation. Now, not even a treat could lure her back to the city. Ellie and Vic lived in perfect harmony. Getting into arguments or trying to figure things out, that wasn't them. Always complete unanimity in everything. Stocky Victor worked as a swimming coach at a children's sports school. Ellie Bean successfully finished medical institute and was planning to go into residency. The only thing was, she couldn't choose a specialization. She joked, "I see myself as an ophthalmologist in a starched white coat, and an ENT doctor in an office with lots of gleaming metal instruments looks excellent too." Fate forced her to make a choice. After defending her diploma as if on some command from above, "Now you can," Ellie got pregnant. 9 months later, another stocky little one was born. Their son, Anthony. Their Tony, their love and their joy. Everything developed as expected. As the happy head of the family often joked, "Time to sit," Aunt sat confidently. "Time to walk," he briskly toddled. Ellie had somewhat neglected medicine at that time, always wanting to spend more time with her son, as if intuition told her, things wouldn't be this carefree for long. Trouble knocked on their seemingly perfect family's door when Anthony was 3 years old. Eleanor's mentor, who always told the young woman she had talent in medicine, hinted that in another 6 months, no medical institution would welcome her. This profession favors those who don't get sidetracked and constantly improve themselves. Even before that, upon learning she would soon be a mother, Eleanor drastically changed her plans regarding her specialization. She chose the smallest children as her future patients, infants, newborns. She decided to become a neonatologist. She scrupulously studied various pathologies in babies who had just come into the world. She spent a lot of time in the pediatric intensive care unit, and then her fervor subsided. Tony occupied all her thoughts and time. To return to her chosen field of medicine, Ellie needed to immerse herself in the current events of the department, where a spot was found for her as a novice pediatrician. Big Tony went to kindergarten. Vic continued his classes with his charges in the sports section. Everything in their family flowed along the planned course. A couple of months later, Tony's kindergarten teacher asked Eleanor to stop by her methodical office after work. There, she shared her observations and concerns with the boy's mother. But first, she asked, "Haven't you noticed anything strange about your son lately?" Ellie raised her eyebrows in surprise, her astonished eyes wide. "My husband and I both work a lot. We usually only see little Tony in the evenings, but he seems healthy and cheerful. What exactly worried you?" "We were preparing for the group's morning performance. The children's folk dances weren't quite right. Anthony did another circle around the music room with his little partner, suddenly turned pale, and sat down on a children's chair. I didn't pay much attention to it then, but your son started stopping mid-stride more and more often. It started to seem to me that a blue tinge appeared around his lips at that moment. Yesterday, we had a routine checkup by the local pediatrician from our district hospital. She advised us to show the boy to a pediatric cardiologist. I'm a doctor myself, a pediatrician too. I couldn't have missed anything in my son, Ellie retorted sharply to the teacher. And to herself she thought, or could I? Without delay, the very next day she took Tony to her own department. The doctor's verdict was stunning. Your son has a rare version of a heart defect that usually only manifests around the age of 3 or 4. The saving solution is immediate surgery. Otherwise, he won't live another 6 months. His condition will worsen every day. Such complex surgical intervention is impossible in our city. Experience in performing such operations has already been gained in Moscow. Cardiac surgeons in Germany, Switzerland, and Israel would be good in this case. Ellie and Anthony walked home slowly. She kept thinking that her boy would feel unwell any moment, that his little heart wouldn't cope. Vic rushed from the sports school as soon as she called him, and she kept poring over textbooks, notes, and medical literature. Everything indicated that in their case, the outcome, whether favorable or fatal, was like a seesaw, 50-50. Where to find that point of balance that would make the seesaw tip in their favor? The cost of the rare and complex operation in Moscow seemed astronomical. Time flew by. Ellie and Victor couldn't raise the necessary sum. Even selling the old grandmother's apartment with her permission and moving into a one-room apartment on the outskirts didn't balance the scales. When one of the charitable foundations intervened in the seemingly hopeless situation, everything moved forward. Finally, the operation and treatment were paid for, tickets to Moscow were bought, and bags were packed. Anthony died on the operating table. The seesaw refused to tip towards their family's happiness and well-being. There was no negligence, no medical error, no serious preconditions, except for the most severe illness itself. Anastasia, as a pediatrician, understood all this perfectly. But her heart froze the moment the surgeon came out of the operating room and spread his hands. Without words, they understood everything at once. No cry, no sigh, just a tighter embrace in which, it seemed, they stood the entire time their son was being saved under the cold glare of bright fluorescent lamps. They returned home devastated. Ellie kept repeating, "Time is to blame. We lost it while trying to raise money for the operation. If we had come to Moscow earlier, everything would have been fine." Then she took retraining courses for pediatricians in the emergency service. It became important for her to be able to save at least someone else's child. That's when she first said her motto phrase to her husband, "We are always responsible for everything. Some people just live their lives without ever realizing it." 2 years after Anthony's death, Victor brought up the subject of a second child with Eleanor. She herself couldn't explain why her feelings were like this now. She didn't want to give birth again, didn't want to have another child. All her efforts, abilities, and skills from now on, she wanted to dedicate only to children in trouble, sick, suffering, but not her own. Vic resigned himself, never brought up the topic again, didn't hint. He was there, completely hers, painfully dear. And now they were driving side by side with his daughter from some strange, incomprehensible girl. Dr. Eleanor Vance didn't even want to call her mother mentally. As if in a delirium, only one thought reigned deep down. What could her husband and this creature in feathers possibly have in common? On a distant June day, when Vic was strolling along the alleys of the local park, it wouldn't have occurred to him that fate was waiting for him on one of the benches in the form of a girl with luxurious gray-green eyes, more charming than any other in the whole wide world. The pretty girl, contrary to his male understanding, was moving a ballpoint pen over her focused, whispering lips, twirling a thick strand of hair around her finger, wrinkling her nose, chewing a sausage sandwich, washing it down with some drink from a plastic bottle, and flipping through pages again. Moreover, she was doing all this simultaneously, not confusing the sequence of actions in the least. Vic froze in his tracks, and, as dramatic as it sounds, he was done for. He fell in love at first sight. His legs carried him to the bench and the girl on their own. And then he was a little flustered, so he blurted out the first thing that came to mind. She didn't hesitate. She offered to introduce herself. She didn't refuse to go to the ice cream parlor with him the next day. In any love or family story, there are two faces, two participants, two heroes. If someone were to write down the memories of Victor and Eleanor, there would be two similar stories. They understood that they loved each other and wanted to be together. They were close, friendly, and understood each other. They lived, they waited, and then they raised Anthony together. Everything was the same, shared. Everything was 50-50. Together they faced a disaster like no other. Their son left, they remained. Against the laws of nature, the elders outlived the younger. That trip to the alluring, picturesque resort of Sochi, which was in full swing preparing for the upcoming Olympic Games, was unusual from the start. There was still a year and a half before the landmark global competition. Construction was booming everywhere in the city. The coach and his team even tested a new hotel and cafe in Krasnaya Poliana, intended for foreign guests. After admiring the grandeur of the Caucasian mountains, swimming to their heart's content in the Black Sea, and then winning another competition, everyone went home happy. When buying tickets, the following fact became clear. At that time, too many professionals from all over the country were traveling to and from Sochi. Travel documents became scarce. The coach's ticket had to be bought in a sleeping car, in a two-person compartment. His neighbor turned out to be a girl. As it later turned out, she was traveling home to his city for vacation. Her ticket was also bought at the last moment. Snub-nosed, blue-eyed, cheerful. And the fact that God had skimped a little on her intelligence, that she was always babbling some nonsense, well, Victor wasn't going to christen children with her. Athletic, with a well-built muscular figure and serious searching brown eyes, he had always been attractive to women. But this didn't interest him at all. He was tied to his Ellie Bean by shared joys and sorrows as if by ropes. He paid little attention to other young women, even if they showed him unambiguous attention. The girl in the compartment was about 10 years younger than him. When he entered, she was engrossed in chewing a potato pie, washing it down with cola. She nodded in greeting and introduced herself. Tanya, I'm going on vacation. I've been painting on sites for almost 9 months without weekends. The foreman gave me a whole 2 weeks off. Go on, sit down. Why are you standing there like a post? We're going to be stuck here for almost another day. Victor, stunned by this monologue, sat down on the second bunk. The train smoothly pulled away, and the beautiful Sochi station slid past the window. 10 minutes later, his boys came to visit him, immediately starting to tease the coach from all sides. Boss, maybe we should switch places. Such a girl is traveling with you. Don't disgrace the team's victories on all fronts here. It was easy with Tanya. She didn't flirt, didn't simper, didn't play games with him at all. She treated him to pies, took one of his sandwiches, went to get coffee from the attendant for both of them, waving him off. Some things are just standard for women. I'm already 23, I just look like a little squirt because of my short height. The passenger train smoothly glided along the even rails. The day outside the window changed into an inky night with rare bright specks of stars in the sky. Victor and Tanya discussed the latest Hollywood premieres, the morals of show business stars, and the beauties of Sochi. Then they lazily told each other a couple of jokes from those they could remember. The conversation didn't flow further, and they decided to go to sleep. Victor leafed through some railway newspapers for a bit. Tanya rustled the pages of a detective novel. Boredom. Both, without saying a word, lay on their sides with their backs to their fellow traveler and pretended to concentrate on falling asleep. After half an hour of struggling, Vic actually dozed off and woke up to hands stroking his shoulders. Don't be afraid, brave coach. You're so brutal. You're too much. It's hard to resist. Victor twitched on the bunk, sat up abruptly, and turned to face Tanya. What are you doing? I told you I'm married. Of course, the man grumbled angrily, and inside him, the predator's excitement had already awakened. Tanya instantly sensed the change in his mood. Well, and then what happened, happened. In the morning, they barely spoke. No, I won't have coffee, thank you. Even the bold Tanya from the night before didn't meet Victor's eyes again, as if she was ashamed. In their city, they went their separate ways on the platform. His memories of that night were strange. For some reason, he didn't even consider the incident a betrayal of his wife. And then the unforeseen happened. In the middle of autumn, Victor was locking the men's changing room doors as usual when the security guard from the lower hall called him. "Vic, there's some girl looking for you here." Going downstairs, Vic was greatly surprised to see his fellow traveler from the Sochi train at the entrance of the children's sports school. She motioned him over with a nod of her head and said through clenched teeth, "I've had so many partners, but to get pregnant like this after just one night, that's never happened before. Listen, coach, abortions are expensive these days. You'll have to help me out with money." Victor couldn't believe his ears. He could become a father again. He could have a son or a daughter. He would give half his life for such an opportunity. Quickly grabbing Tanya by the elbow, he dragged her around the corner of the building to the summer sports ground. There, he sat her down on the stands near the football field and said loudly and clearly, "You will give birth to this child for me, and I will be there. Not as your husband, don't even hope for that, but as his or her father. Just dare to harm the baby in any way, you'll regret it." Tanya resisted this outcome to her interesting situation, desperately shouting at him, "So who are you to make me waste my youth and life on your offspring? Found yourself a surrogate mother, a free one? Maybe someone will ask me to marry them later, and I'll have your appendage?" They sat down at the negotiating table again and discussed the terms. Victor helps Tanya financially in everything, comes to her at any moment upon her first request. They will decide the child's fate after birth. In return, she will lead a healthy lifestyle for the remaining 7 months, doing nothing that could harm the future baby. They found out they would be parents to a girl after another ultrasound. Tanya unexpectedly became kinder. Didn't want a boy, but a girl. "I'll still think about whether to keep her myself or give her to you, Daddy, as a gift. You were happy, weren't you?" Vic looked at her and thought, how could I have been so weak on the train to be next to such a woman for a few hours? He kept preparing for a conversation with Ellie, wanted to tell her everything, confess, but couldn't bring himself to and postponed the explanation for the future. Let the girl be born, and then he would definitely confess everything to his beloved woman. Elena was born quickly, healthy, without any abnormalities. 5 days later, Victor was already picking Tanya up from the maternity hospital. The lively painter had quieted down and surprisingly treated the baby with care and tenderness. Perhaps the maternal instinct had awakened, or perhaps it was the fact that the girl was pretty, quiet, and calm, as if she felt that there was something fundamentally wrong with her arrival in the world. Dad and Mom don't live together. There's no normal, in the generally accepted sense, family near her. 3 months after his daughter's birth, Victor suggested to Tanya that she sign the adoption papers, transferring the baby to him so that the woman would be free of any obligations again. The refusal was unexpectedly sharp. Moreover, Tanya insisted that he tell his wife nothing. Otherwise, she would fight tooth and nail to keep him away from Elena. At first, Vic was torn by doubts. He wanted to involve lawyers to win his daughter, and he constantly monitored whether Tanya was treating the girl well. There was nothing to find fault with. The master of her painting craft even managed to save a decent sum for the child, so she couldn't be caught on a financial hook either. Time passed. Victor got used to visiting his second home, where Lainey always greeted him with joyful squeals. Sometimes they went for walks together, sometimes they even had lunch or dinner like big adults, Dad, Mom, and daughter. Eleanor fanatically disappeared at work, taking extra shifts. She paid no attention to her husband's absences, but if they happened to be home together during rare hours, she was almost the same, kind, affectionate, attentive. The ambulance van, tired from night shifts, slowed down near the reception area of the Children's City Hospital. A moment later, 2 burly orderlies were already carrying the stretcher with Elena to the examination room. Doctors bustled about, immediately reassuring everyone that the girl's life was not in danger. The mission of Dr. Eleanor Vance's brigade was over. The girl was transported without incident. Victor stayed with his daughter. Eleanor had to return to the emergency station. Only later that evening would her husband honestly tell her everything about those events on the train, which had become long past. By then, Ellie would be almost calm, wondering why she hadn't considered her husband's brief affair a crime against their family. It was as if she felt Victor's intense longing for this girl, in whom his dream of having a child was embodied. People have different destinies, and the heavens help them find the happiness of fatherhood in different ways. After that, things even looked somewhat amusing. Eleanor advised her husband on which doll to buy for the girl's discharge, bought sweets and gifts for her birthday and New Year. Only once did she ask, "Vic, why does Elena's mother have such a strange appearance?" Victor explained that Tanya's physical metamorphoses had started recently. Neither of them suspected then what Elena's mother's pink dreadlocks and mannerisms would lead to. The thing was, Tanya had fallen in love with a new painter in their brigade. The man called himself a free nomadic artist. During breaks, he would paint her portrait on the wall and then paint over it himself with the required monochrome layer of colored paint. Tanya swooned, got the same dreadlocks as him. He advised her on the shade. The free artist didn't invite her on dates, didn't gaze languidly into her eyes, didn't shower her with gifts, didn't even hint at getting closer somewhere in a secluded corner of the construction site. He captivated her with his bohemian spirit, his charm, visible even through the beautifully cut holes in his jeans, his sophistication and aristocracy, evident in every gesture, movement, turn of his head. What wind had brought this unrecognized genius to their construction site, Tanya didn't ask herself. She only prayed that Mary Poppins in male form wouldn't disappear from their simple horizon on some pleasant day. Now she imitated her idol in everything. She dressed like her gifted idol, smoked long thin cigarettes like her god, savored delicacies like her prince, sushi and wasabi for lunch, a glass of Italian wine and elite cheese with mold for dinner. She paid less and less attention to Lainey, only pretending to be the ideal mother when Victor appeared. He, however, felt no alarm about Tanya's striking changes. By the New Year holidays, Tanya sensed that her beloved love was about to take flight. During breaks between falling into the abyss of love, the nomad told her that he never stayed in one place for more than 2 to 3 months. It became boring. He dropped out of the art college where he learned his craft in his 3rd year. The urge to change places, to unknown lands, won out. Tanya rushed after the object of her love 2 weeks after melancholy appeared in his eyes. But first, she prepared well. She already knew that Victor had no secrets left from his wife, so she invited both of them to a cafe to discuss an important matter. Ordering coffee and pastries for everyone to, as she thought, sweeten the pill, she didn't beat around the bush. "I've met the man of my life. That's what people call such love, I think. I'm ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. Elena is now superfluous to me. God knows I wasn't always such a bad mother to her. I'm attached to her in my own way. Now I want to arrange my personal life. If you want, Vic, drop the documents. I'll give you my daughter and leave." Ellie was shocked by this offer. She wasn't at all against Victor's daughter living with them, but how could a mother just give up her child like that? The image of her little son Tony swam before her eyes, and a sharp, profound pang struck her heart. "If you came back, my dear, I would never give you away to anyone." Aloud she said, "We are always responsible for our loved ones. Vic, you haven't even said a word yet, and I, as always, am rushing ahead of everyone. We agree, Tanya, to welcome your girl into our family. Draw up the necessary documents, we will sign everything and gather all the papers on our end." During the adoption, easily bypassing all sorts of bureaucratic obstacles, Victor and Eleanor adopted Elena in the shortest possible time. The girl had always adored her father. Her mother's departure was explained to her as a vital necessity, and she quickly found common ground with Aunt Ellie. Crowded but not unhappy. Now the voice of a little bell, always participating in all household chores, constantly echoed in their small one-room apartment. Elena hung laundry on the balcony with her dad, helping Aunt Ellie. And then the female half of the family would bake pancakes in the kitchen and call the head of the family to come quickly for tea. This story could have ended here, but it is not for us to decide how fate will unfold. It had already prepared new trials for these people. Another brigade was supposed to go to the call about the collapsed building. Someone in the heavenly office ordered otherwise. a nurse from the neighboring team slipped right on the steps of the station. The first frosts had just arrived in the city, and everyone had somewhat forgotten about the treacherous ice. Somewhere on the other side of the city, near the collapsed building, the unfortunate victims were waiting for the emergency service, and the medical worker's leg was swelling before their eyes. Even without an X-ray, it was clear. It was a fracture. Dr. Eleanor Vance's group was urgently reassigned to the accident site. As always, the collected Livy, the indispensable Gregory for trips on any type of road, the focused Ellie. Everyone was present. They could depart. Even Olivia didn't argue about riding in the back, quickly getting into the cabin seat with Greg. So with Greg in the cabin, there was no time for arguments and bickering. A couple of days ago, Ellie and Olivia had a serious conversation in an informal setting. They were friends and used informal address, only maintaining subordination at work. The doctor initiated the dialogue, but she didn't reprimand her subordinate for mistakes at work. She chided her about Greg. "Don't you have a heart, Ollie? The whole station is gossiping that Greggy is crazy about you, and you act like a stranger. You're good in every way, externally, internally. And as for the scar on his face, it only enhances a man." "And what do you suggest, Ellie Bean? He acts like the devil around me at any touch. Okay, am I contagious or something? He touches me accidentally and jumps back. How am I supposed to understand such a reaction to myself? And you say he's in love. That's all nonsense." Now Olivia was riding next to Greg and again involuntarily admired his masculine profile. The scar, cutting across his eyebrow and snaking down to his beautifully outlined lips, no longer frightened her. Greg was attractive with that very male beauty that promises protection and strength to whoever is by his side. The only mystery remained why he so deliberately avoided her. If he loved her, why act like that? Greg was afraid to get closer than a meter to the nurse, Livy. He loved this cheerful person too much to offend her with an involuntary display of his male interest. And even now, as soon as Olivia briefly turned away towards the window, he would lightning-fast glance at her to admire her unassuming but so lovely beauty again. When the nurse returned her head to its original position, Greg sat straight, looking at the road as if nothing had happened. In front of the house where a collapse had occurred on the very top floor of a rather old building, a crowd of onlookers had gathered. It buzzed like 100 agitated bumblebees, filled with rumors, fed by alarming reports from rescuers, only to buzz at full strength again. "Did you hear? A little girl was crushed by something heavy on the first floor. She's screaming in agony, and our brave rescuers can't get to her yet." Hearing this information, the thin little Dr. Eleanor Vance commanded, "Olivia, prepare a syringe with pain medication. I'll try to crawl through to the injured little girl." At her words, Greg and Olivia turned around in unison. "You can't do that, boss. Until the rescuers give the all-clear, the building could collapse at any moment." "No time to be afraid," the brave woman replied. "There's a child alone, scared, in pain. What's the point of our ambulance service then if it's as slow as a turtle?" With a syringe of medicine in her outstretched hand, Dr. Eleanor Vance rushed towards the building, near whose wall both firefighters in shining helmets and guys from the Ministry of Emergency Situations were working simultaneously. "Woman, where are you going?" "I'll try to crawl through to the girl and give her a pain injection. I'm an ambulance doctor." "The passage is too narrow. None of our guys could get through." "But I'll try anyway." Building debris, chunks of fallen plaster, blue paint streaks from the stairwell wall, more debris, and endless irritating dust. Ellie was first forced to get on her knees, then moved almost crawling, mentally thanking her husband for making her keep fit for so many years, going to the pool twice a week, going for morning runs with him. At the end of the crawl, she finally saw the girl, who was pinned down by a metal door from one of the apartments. The little girl's legs were pressed by a heavy rectangular slab like a press, and for some reason were sticking out towards the exit, as if the child had been running and disaster caught her on the move. She turned back and shouted loudly, "Two thin men can easily get through here. The girl is pinned by the door, but I'm already giving her pain medication and a sedative injection." "Don't shout, for God's sake," someone whispered back. Loud noises are dangerous in such a dilapidated building right now." A couple of minutes later, the little girl quieted down. Ellie began to push the metal barrier into the apartment with her shoulder. With difficulty, but the massive object moved. Rustling sounds came from behind, and the woman whispered, "The girl is relaxed from the injection, she's limp. Pull her by the legs and I'll continue pushing the door the other way." Working together, things went faster. The men pulled the girl towards the exit through the narrow labyrinth. The way back no longer seemed so unknown. Ellie hesitated for only a couple of minutes. Outside, people never understood what happened next. A roar. The building began to fold like a house of cards before their eyes. Only 2 young men managed to escape from under its arches with the girl in their arms. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a well-known children's ambulance doctor in the city, was buried under the debris forever. Calm, always quickly concentrating in difficult situations, the nurse Olivia screamed hysterically, rushing to Greg, who had already grabbed her in his arms and began stroking her head like a little girl. It seemed to both of them that before their eyes, their Ellie bean had been swallowed by some greedy monster, opening its toothed maw filled with stone fragments. It had lured Dr. Eleanor Vance, who bravely stepped inside with a syringe and swallowed her without choking. People bustled around. Someone said that the fate of 4 more residents was unknown. Ellie's widowed brigade stood in the middle of the chaos, holding each other tightly. A little later, having been informed that their presence was no longer needed, they went to the van, still holding hands. They now had to go to Victor to deliver the bitter news to him and little Elena. 2 weeks passed. Greg and Olivia now had a new doctor in charge, an elderly pediatrician who had transferred to the emergency service from the city children's polyclinic. The silent, even somewhat stern man was a qualified and experienced specialist, but the nurse and the driver felt that the soul had left their close-knit brigade. Everything seemed as usual, and yet nothing was. They didn't want to go to work. The day Dr. Eleanor Vance passed away before their eyes, they immediately rushed to her home. Lainey was at kindergarten. Vic was packing a bag to go to another training session. Olivia had never seen emotions manifest this way on the face of someone receiving sad news. After their account of Ellie's last moments, a darkness spread across Vic's face. Just moments before, his eyes had been alive, shining, but then the light in them went out, and his skin turned an ashen gray. How to find words to comfort someone in such a situation? Everything said would seem empty and unnecessary, all consolations useless. Olivia and Greg realized that they were superfluous in this desert, scorched by grief. They didn't want to part. Some thick, strong thread now bound this couple, who had just witnessed a terrible, hopeless tragedy. They came back to Olivia's apartment together after their shift. It seemed to both of them now that no words were needed to explain how much time they had lost. Olivia prepared food, as if she had done it for her and Greg 1,000 times before. Both, after the severe stress, unexpectedly found such a ravenous appetite that a huge frying pan of fried potatoes, generously covered with eggs, was devoured in just about 5 minutes. Before, Gregory always thought, if Olivia were near, he would pounce on her like a famished wolf. It happened differently. He felt such tenderness towards this woman that a little more, and he would melt like ice cream in hot weather. Greg felt such happiness inside that it seemed as if all those long torments of waiting hadn't happened. When Livy fell into a restless sleep, he couldn't fall into a saving slumber himself. He checked just in case it was his imagination. She was indeed sleeping on his shoulder, his woman, his dream, his vision. And he was deeply touched by the warmth with which Livy touched his disfigured scar on his face, how she kissed the curved line, looking into his eyes. Did he like her gentle caress? And she behaved as if he were a hero, a protector, a support by her side. He immediately remembered the disgust on his wife's face when he returned from the hospital after being wounded in the hot spot. They didn't utter a single word like, "I love you," "I need you," or "you're needed." In their story, everything had already been said long ago, and now they were simply proving to each other that it wasn't a mistake, that it was worth enduring and waiting for everything to happen exactly as it was happening now. In the morning, Olivia calmly said, Greg, you should go home and get some things for now. My apartment is closer to work, and it's more spacious there. Later we'll decide what to do with your place. I'd combine our efforts and exchange our properties for something bigger. Greg had never known quiet family comfort before. He and his wife had lived in perpetual separation. He always felt a certain homelessness, a certain coldness within the walls of his home. It was as if he was with that woman of his, but the persistent feeling that they lived separately never left him. That's why he constantly threw himself into work. With his Livy, everything was different from the very beginning. A certain confidence appeared, that he was needed and important, that even when he went to the supermarket for groceries at his girlfriend's request, she would miss him and greet him so warmly at the door, as if he were returning from some faraway journeys every time. Victor lived as if in a daze after Ellie's tragic death. In the morning, he mechanically prepared sandwiches and coffee for himself, simultaneously stirring milk porridge on the stove for Lainey. The girl became his salvation, his outlet, his light in the window. In his free time, he couldn't bear to stay in the tiny apartment. Both his and Ellie's parents, after the grief that struck the family, immediately declined sharply, almost simultaneously turning into helpless old people. Both older families sought solace in working the land. They fanatically planted everything in the garden and vegetable patch, finding in this work, if not joy, then oblivion. They tried not to think, not to remember. They even stubbornly refused to take their granddaughter for weekends. And they couldn't cope with the lively, curious girl who asked 100 questions a minute anyway. On weekends, Victor took his daughter on improvised hikes. They would go somewhere far away to the river, pitch a tent, wander around the steppe, picking wildflowers for Ellie's grave. On the way back, they always stopped at the cemetery. Vic would sit on the wooden bench and talk for a long time with the beloved woman who had passed away prematurely. He would slowly tell her how their week with Elena had gone, sometimes proudly boasting that his charges had won another prize at prestigious competitions. Ellie from the photograph looked at him with her gray-green eyes and smiled that smile with which she loved to announce her life motto: "We are responsible for everything. If you commit to something, be kind enough to see it through to the victorious end." After visiting the cemetery, Vic felt better for a while. The burden lifted. He also noticed a new trait in himself. Carefree women laughing on the street irritated him. If he came across such a cheerful, laughing woman, he would watch her go and think spitefully, "I wonder, my dear, would you have stepped so recklessly into the ruins of a building hanging by a thread if a stranger's child was crying there?" Dark resentment enveloped him. Why were they all still living while his Ellie Bean had left him forever? Elena matured all at once in her very young years, turning into a kind of experienced little old woman. After kindergarten, she never threw tantrums. Buckwheat porridge with sausages was the best food for dinner. The story of Cinderella, read for the first time at night, was like a new discovery every time. She wasn't afraid to stay home alone if Victor had to leave urgently. After such absences, she would always ask solicitously, "Are you tired? Shall I turn on the kettle? Let me take your dirty socks to the bathroom." She had already lost a second mother, but she didn't ask Vic any questions like, "When is Mom coming back?" or "Why do we live alone?" They were fine even in this orphaned solitude, always understanding each other with half a word, with half a glance. Sometimes in the evenings, Greg and Olivia would drop by with pastries or a cake. Then they would all have noisy tea parties together. They remembered Ellie with bright sadness. All four at the table loved her, and all four missed her very much. Victor sometimes painfully wanted to leave the city, where everything reminded him of the happy past. But where would he find a new, well-prepared team of athletes? And his wife's grave was here, his elderly parents nearby. The desire didn't align with reality, no matter how hard he tried. They decided to mark the anniversary of Dr. Eleanor Vance's death in a cafe. The brave doctor's former colleagues took care of everything themselves. Victor, Elena, and the parents were brought to the establishment when everything was ready. Greg and Olivia had recently gotten married, deciding not to delay making their relationship official any longer. Their family was expecting an addition in a couple of months. They had also recently moved into a new apartment, buying it as they had planned with the money from selling their bachelor pads. Many warm words were spoken about Ellie at the memorial table. No one wanted to leave quickly. This time, even Vic's parents expressed a strong desire to take the girl home with them for a couple of days. They genuinely missed the little one. After seeing off the last guests who had gathered to honor his wife's memory, Vic walked home through the same park where they had once met. The same bench in the shade of an already very old chestnut tree. The same alleys with bushes and flowers, shielding loving couples in the far corner of the path from curious eyes. Some group was making a lot of noise. There were 3 young men. Together they surrounded a girl, not letting her take a single step. Victor's eyes darkened for a moment. The victim of the young men was an exact copy of his Ellie Bean in her youth. A thin reed with a mop of hair falling to her shoulders. The girl stood helplessly between the broad-shouldered guys, clutching an elegant handbag to herself. The guys grinned predatorily and tightened the ring around her. Vic quickened his pace. "Hey guys, don't you think the lady doesn't want to talk to you?" One of the young predators stopped, slightly turned his head and hissed, "Sir, you should just keep walking. We'll sort things out with our friend here ourselves without outside interference." A cold shiver of rage ran through Victor's body, quickly turning into the angry inferno of a volcano. It was infinitely important for him now to save this young girl, not to let the arrogant individuals mock her. Even if the whole group was long and well acquainted, even if she wasn't truly in danger, it was important for him to snatch her away from these insolent guys and take her far away from here. "Looks like the quick-witted uncle didn't understand us. Go another way from here, stranger. We're all friends here, and you're superfluous." Victor glanced at the girl. Despair swam in her green eyes. She was silent, but her gaze pleaded for help. Vic couldn't be mistaken that she was uncomfortable with the unpleasant scene unfolding here. "The girl is leaving with me," he issued an ultimatum to the guys, "or you'll regret that our paths crossed." "Just look at this funny man." One of the trio stepped away from his friends and started pacing near Vic. "He doesn't understand orders the first time. Got a bold one here." The guy quickly put his hand in his pockets, pulled out a small knife, its steel glinting in the light of the street lamp. How do you like this argument, noble knight, who decided to save the honor of a lady he doesn't know at all? How do you prefer it? Should I tickle your throat with this toy, or shall we check if our little beauty likes such games?" Vic, who often visited the neighboring tenants who rented one of the halls in their sports school for martial arts classes, was not afraid of attacks from youngsters at all. Now it was important for him that they didn't touch her, the copy of Ellie Bean from the time of their first dates. The guys collectively abandoned their victim, who instead of fleeing the scene, froze in place like a statue and began to surround him from all sides. But this turn of events only spurred Victor on. He had only had a couple of shots of vodka that evening. The rest was fueled by hatred for the scumbags who thought they owned this park, his and Ellie's park, and that anything was permissible for them. How much older was he than them? About 10 years, no more. They could almost be considered of the same generation, but there was so much cruelty in his opponent's eyes, such a craving for lawlessness and permissiveness, that it was completely beyond the bounds of decency in the coach's understanding. The fight began abruptly and fiercely. The guy with the knife seriously scratched his shoulder with the sharp blade almost immediately, as if teasing and inviting more. The strongest, broadest of the 3 attackers looked into Victor's eyes with a smile on his face, trying to defeat him morally at the initial stage. This girl still stood aside, her mouth open either from fear or confusion. "Go on, scram!" Vic shouted at her. "Be gone from here in a second." But the young lady wasn't going to give up. She shook her head vigorously. "I won't leave you alone with them. They've been harassing me for a long time, and now they got a chance when they caught me alone without friends, and late at night too. We all study at the university together. The boys are from the elite, golden youth, and I'm from an orphanage, like a red flag to a bull for them. They're all interested in what life was like in my homeless childhood, my youth in a state institution. Where I come from, we didn't leave our own in trouble. I'll be right here." Victor was so distracted by the girl's monologue that he took a couple of hard blows to the ribs. Something inside cracked. A fracture, no doubt, he thought with annoyance. At this moment, the guy with the knife decided to entertain himself differently. He jumped up behind his classmate, pressing the blade, which again gleamed in the lamplight, against her delicate cheek. "So you say, my little kitty, you're not used to abandoning your own? And if I tickle your throat now, will you bolt across the park?" The girl, to everyone's surprise, who had been as if in suspended animation until then, didn't faint this time. She turned to the guy, causing a thin stream of blood to immediately run down her cheek, and shouted, "How you've annoyed me at university, you little creeps! Aren't you nothing without your daddies and mummies? An empty space, a zero with nothing after it? What can you do in this life by yourself? Take away your expensive car, your trinkets, your bank card. What do you know about having to survive in a wild pack of teenagers?" None of the men involved in the fight expected such a fierce response from the pretty student. The guys became completely enraged, their faces even darkened with uncontrollable fury. Putting the knife away from the girl's throat, her opponent joined his friends. Now they surrounded Victor from all sides with a mass of bodies and faces distorted by malice. He himself couldn't quite remember later how he pushed their presumed leader in the chest with all his might. The latter did some kind of acrobatic flip, his feet leaving the ground, and fell backward flat on his back. His head hit the hard curb bordering the alley. A ruby stain of thick blood immediately began to spread under the young man's head. Vic, who had taken his section kids to the first aid station so many times when they got injured, instantly knew that things were bad. He habitually placed his finger on his opponent's neck where the living pulse usually beat. There was no pulse. The rest was a blur. The girl was the first to come to. "Call an ambulance, call the police, quick, nobody leave." The guys nervously pulled out their phones, calling somewhere in a frenzy. Parents, services, some important acquaintances. Vic sat on the curb next to the guy and thought frantically, "Elena is at home with her parents who wanted to look after her today. They'll probably arrest me now. What will happen to the girl?" He quickly beckoned the young student over. "Well, what's your name? I'm going to need your help." "I'm Vera. Tell me what to do." "I'm Victor. Here's a note with my address, keys to the apartment, and the phone number of my friends, Gregory and Olivia. My 5-year-old daughter is with my parents right now. Pick her up and give her to my friends. They'll take care of her." When the police, the emergency service, and a crowd of other people arrived, Victor was strangely calm. As the saying goes, never say never to prison or poverty. Apparently, it was his turn to learn what state bread and life in a penal colony were like. Look at all the important gentlemen who arrived, already barking orders at servicemen and some guards who came with them. Perhaps Vic was incredibly lucky that he was immediately taken to the police car, otherwise the unleashed dogs surrounding the high-ranking father of the deceased guy would have dealt with him right there on the spot. Vera, whom he had saved from the boundless scumbags, kept hovering around Vic. She even managed to show the ambulance service the cut on her neck to get a certificate of injuries later. She kept chattering and chattering something to the plainclothes officers, the investigator. Their ruffled company was brought to the police station together. His own documents and mobile phone were immediately confiscated. While they were dealing with him, Vera, like a quick mouse, ran off to the side and made several phone calls. Then, meeting Vic's eyes, she gave him a thumbs up, indicating that the mechanism for caring for his daughter had been set in motion. She turned out to be quite a daredevil, managing to be everywhere and do everything. At the trial, she presented everything in such vivid detail that the wealthy, successful relatives of the participants in the fight turned pale from such frankness. She found witnesses that the trio of golden boys had been harassing and humiliating her for a long time. Everyone in her group respected her, and they collectively disliked these classmates. The picture for the victim was not a pretty one. Undoubtedly, unquestionably, beyond any doubt, Victor had no intention of harming the boy who was just beginning to live. It was too cruel a boomerang even for such an explosive youth. It just happened as it happened. He was given 5 years in a general regime colony for exceeding the limits of self-defense. Vera's fervent participation greatly helped the judge make such an optimal decision for him. The prosecution insisted on 8 years of imprisonment, constantly trying to steer the court session towards a different article. The judge ultimately leaned towards the first option. Vic didn't quite know how Greg and Olivia managed to arrange things with the guardianship authorities, but as Laney was given into their care during his time in prison. During the investigation, Benjamin, was born into their family. Pink-cheeked Benny. The ambulance brigade in the city had connections. After all, they often saved the children not only of ordinary people, but also of important officials. When Olivia was allowed a visit, she was able to reassure Vic. "Don't worry, friend. Elena will be fine with us. You and Ellie are not strangers to us. I'll write to you about her life and times regularly and with pleasure. Greg and I will come visit you as soon as they allow it. You'll be serving your sentence in a neighboring region, so that's not far for us. And tell me, what should we do with your little shadow?" Vera visits Elena all the time, brings her toys and sweets, asks our permission to pick the girl up from kindergarten, take her for a walk in the park, go to the cinema to see a cartoon premiere. I never thought the girl would turn out to be such a loyal friend. Of course, we met under circumstances that weren't the most pleasant, even tragic, you could say. She defended me so actively during the investigation, testified so fiercely in court as the main witness. You never know how such a little one will behave in extreme conditions. She turned out to be quite capable. My God, Vic, how naive you are when it comes to relationships with the opposite sex. She fell in love with you at first sight. Knightly behavior, a protector, and you have the looks. And about her being a little one, you're mistaken, my dear. She entered university after a law technical school. She's already 23 years old now. You're only 9 years apart. She just looks that young because of her miniature height and overall fragility. She has a great character. Take a closer look at the girl. Ellie isn't coming back, and you and Elena still have a lot of good things ahead of you. You both deserve it. The guard who led the prisoner after the visit with the young woman never understood why the stocky man was smiling all the way back to his cell. How could he guess that Victor was thinking that perhaps there would still be happiness in his life if this lively person with green eyes waited for him to be released? Love comes in different forms after all. Some constantly trade the feeling for copper pennies, while others remain the chosen one for many years without fear or reproach. It's just a matter of luck.